Welcome, guys. Today we're going to talk about Standard 6.2, which deals with some changes in the United States in the early part of the 20th century. Some of these things relate directly to the end of World War I, and some of them are going to be just some societal changes that happen beyond that. So let's dive in and take a look. And as always, if you have any questions, you can shoot me an email. So the first thing we're going to talk about is something that is directly related to the end of World War I. The end of World War I, even during World War I, there's this, idea that we're at war with the Germans, but we have lots of German Americans here. So do we want all these, what we start to talk about as hyphenated Americans, German Americans, Italian Americans, Polish Americans, or do we just want Americans? And there's this idea that starts to get pushed around called 100% Americanism, which is this sort of propaganda during World War I that promotes the idea that we should be afraid of anybody who identifies themselves with another country. And so lots of people start to, change the spellings of their last names. Some had already done that. More are going to do it. You're going to see people who are, you're going to stop identifying as Irish Americans, and now I'm just an American, okay? And over time, this is okay because this leads to patriotism, but over time this also leads to xenophobia, which is fear of outsiders, okay? If somebody is proud of their Polish roots, like my wife is proud of her Filipino heritage, that's okay. I mean, as long as she's an American, she's an American citizen, she's proud of that. Those two aren't in conflict. But there starts to be this idea that if you do identify with Germany, if you identify with anybody else, in addition to, you're less American somehow. And so this becomes a little bit of a problem. At the same time, you've got a lot of labor unrest. Inflation is high, so prices are going up. There are all these veterans coming back from World War I who want jobs, and so there's a lot of competition for the jobs. The wartime economy, where there's a lot of demand for workers, is starting to dwindle. Okay, there's less demand because now Europe is going back to work and they're not buying as much of our stuff. You compound that with some of the other things going on, where Europe is in some places turning to socialism. Russia straight up turns communist in 1917, and that scares a lot of Americans who say, we don't want to become socialist, we don't want to become communist. And around the same time, you get these bombs that go off in 8 different cities in the United States, and anarchists claim that they are to blame for them. They're the ones who put those bombs there. So a lot of people start to say, boy, America's fabric is under attack. We're really terrified about what this might be becoming. And so there's this period called the Red Scare. It's this idea that the United States might be overthrown by communists. We're really worried about this. So over here in this image, you see a guy with a knife. It says Bolshevism. That's another word for communism. It's a Bolshevik. He's got a bomb and he's ready to knife and or blow up the Statue of Liberty. Now, in response, you're going to get the Attorney General of the United States, a guy by the name of Palmer. Palmer goes around and he rounds up and arrests about 4,000 alleged communists. And it's a little bit brutal at times, okay? He's arresting people. He's locking them up for hours and hours and hours to interrogate them without allowing them to have legal representation, without a lawyer. He's not giving them sometimes food or water. He's getting confessions that are under duress. I mean, all kinds of problematic things. But he uses the information he gets from them to go and round up some other folks. So this picture here on the top right is showing that he's going in and he's just breaking up places that he suspects immigrants who might not be fully dedicated to democracy and capitalism may be. Only 600 of those 4,000 are actually going to be deported, which suggests he doesn't have as high of a success rate as you would want if you're going to those lengths. So Palmer says, hey, I think there are going to be more anarchist attacks like those that happened in 1919. They're coming, but they never come. So he starts to lose some credibility. But even though people stop listening to Palmer, they do have this idea that the outsiders should be feared, and they don't like that. So if we don't like Palmer and his response, who are we going to look to? Well, a lot of Americans turn to the Klan, and the KKK has been kind of dormant for a little while. Not dormant, but less active, I should say. But then it's going to change. The Klan is going to move from just being, we're down on African Americans in the South that are trying to be, quote, uppity, in other words, to act as they believe white people only should. Now the Klan is going to say, well, we're also anti-immigrant because lots of immigrants from Eastern Europe are Catholic. We're going to be anti-Catholic. We're going to be anti-radical. Again, radical being communist, socialist. We don't like that. And they start to use some very just common business and advertising practices. So you see like this little business card down here that advertises a Klan convention that's going to be held. And notice where it's going to be held. It's Seattle Klan, number 4. So there are 4 clans in Seattle, Washington. Okay, so this is not just a southern thing. It's now starting to spread across the country. And a lot of people feel like they might be the people who are going to protect us from the outsiders. So, yeah, it is national. It's not just southern. They're going to go after people that they feel like aren't living up to a moral code. And you say, that's kind of weird. Well, the Klan actually believes that it's doing God's will. There's a religious nature to it. I'm a religious guy myself, so I'm not saying that religion leads to the Klan, okay? However, there are some people who like to twist the Bible and say it justifies their beliefs about race, about outsiders and all that kind of stuff, and that's the Klan. So they go after people that they think aren't living up to their moral standards, bootleggers, gamblers, all kinds of stuff. And people are like, yeah, these are the guys who are gonna make the country like I think it ought to be. And then there are all these sex scandals that break, that prove that the leaders of the Klan are, even though they claim to be moral people, are having affairs with secretaries and that kind of thing. And they're like, maybe not. So we're going to turn back to Congress. Who's going to protect us from these scary outsiders? They look to Congress. And Congress passes some immigration quotas that just are very limiting as to who can come into the United States, even from Europe. And Asians are completely prohibited. We've seen this before with the Chinese Exclusion Act when they build the railroad. The Chinese build the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, and then we say, you can't come over anymore. This is supported further by social Darwinism, right? The idea that America is pure and we don't want to dilute it with outsiders. But I hope you also see that as racism, right? If that sounds like a really good idea for a second, like, yeah, we don't want to pollute America. Your ancestors are almost certainly not just from here, by the way. When else did we see this law passed? Chinese Exclusion Act. So we're going to start to see some other things happen at the same time. Okay, so there is a desire to get back to kind of old school beliefs. And so there's a resurgence in evangelical Christianity. In fact, a bunch of guys get together and they say, what are the core beliefs? Whether you're Baptist or Presbyterian or Methodist, what are the things that we would say are the most important? And they publish these things together in a series of articles called The Fundamentals. And because of that, these people call themselves the fundamentalists. The big thing they promote and they push is that you should interpret the Bible literally. So for example, if the Bible says the world was created in 6 days and on the 7th day God rested, they're not looking for a metaphorical interpretation of that. They're not looking to see, well, maybe a day could be an indeterminate period of time. They would say, no, it's 24-hour periods, okay? And so this is the kind of thing you start to see from the fundamentalists. And you might say, my church believes that. Yeah, the fundamentalists actually are very far-reaching. In fact, Greenville has a lot of people who would very openly say, we're fundamentalists, okay? This is going to start to butt up with another theory that's happening and gaining more and more traction in the early 20th century, and that's Darwin's theory of evolution, the idea that man evolved from other creatures. This is going to become a real problem. And so in Tennessee, because there's so much fundamentalist thought, they actually pass a law that says you can't teach evolution in public schools. It's illegal. And so and yeah, I said that right. I know today it would be the opposite. You can't teach creation. You can only teach evolution. But in the early 1900s, it was you can't teach anything other than creation. Well, this guy named John Scopes, who is an atheist, is hired as a teacher in Tennessee, and he goes in and intentionally teaches evolution. He knows he's going to get arrested. He knows he's going to be fined. It's a small fine. I think it's like $50. I know that's a lot more in today's money, but it's not the end of the world. But he's going to be defended by a guy who comes from the American Civil Liberties Union by the name of Clarence Darrow. Now, Clarence Darrow shows up, and his whole goal is, I want religion to look foolish. We're going to prove that, yeah, he violated the law, but that's not really what this is about. It's about the law is bad because if you believe this, you're dumb. And he feels at the end of this thing like he succeeds. And part of that's because the lawyer he goes up against is a guy you've heard of before. This is William Jennings Bryan, who is now in his 80s. In fact, he's so old that within a week of the end of this trial, he dies, okay? And he has some beliefs that even according to, most fundamentalists today, for sure, and even back then, they're a little bit extreme. And so Darrow puts Brian on the stand and he, do you believe this? Do you believe this? And the things that Brian is willing to agree to saying, yes, I believe, Darrow's just like, this guy's an idiot. Now, Scopes ends up losing. He has to pay the fine. Technically, Brian wins the case, but both sides walk away feeling like they accomplished what they set out to do. And this debate continues even today. Let me throw something out here, okay, because this is something that comes up all the time in school. The question of evolution in schools. And every year there are people who get to the evolution unit and they say, I don't want to take that, I don't want to learn about that. And let me just encourage you, as a man of faith, you should know, if you don't agree with evolution, what evolution's all about, okay? You should be able to know about that, or else how in the world are you ever going to argue against something knowledgeably? You should always know what the other side believes. That's my personal take. Maybe I've gone too far, but think about that. So both sides feel like they won, and there's still an argument that's left over even today. All right. Now, one more thing. There's this push to the way things were, let's be more religiously conservative. And one of the things that grows out of that is these temperance movements. So there have been temperance movements really almost all through American history. That's the idea that we should limit or get rid of the sale of alcohol. It's happened since the 1830s. A lot of people start to turn back to this now, though, because during World War I, as we see all these immigrants coming in, if you're a German immigrant, for example, Germans culturally often tend to drink a decent amount, okay? And a lot of Europeans do. And so there's this idea that, hey, if we get rid of alcohol as a legal option, maybe these folks won't want to come anymore. On top of that, in World War I, there are grain shortages. In order to make alcohol, you need grain, and we don't have as much as we would like. My dog growling, ignore him. And we don't like, specifically, the Germans. And so we pass the 18th Amendment, which completely prohibits the sale of alcohol in the United States. Now, some people obey, but that's going to totally depend on your class. The rich tend to ignore it, the poor tend to ignore it, the middle class, they tend to do what they're supposed to do. Hey, Indy! So whether or not people complied with this completely depends on all these things. Class, ethnic background. Again, if you're German, you're probably not going to be like, yeah, prohibition sounds great, right? Even religion. Catholics tend to drink more than Protestants, for example. And so you get this growth of bootlegging. Bootlegging is where you start to have these places where people go, speakeasies, to get alcohol. This is like a speakeasy is you knock on the door and you're like, hey, let me in. And they're like, what's the password? And you give them the password and they let you in, and there's a bar in there, right? Which, I mean, honestly, if the point is to make drinking less appealing, that sounds like fun, right? You feel like you're sneaking around and whatnot. But bootlegging itself is just the illegal sale of alcohol. It comes from the idea that people would actually shove, like this lady, they'd shove alcohol into their bootleg. And you'd find the sale of alcohol, but it goes underground. And it actually has the effect of handing the sale of alcohol from legal sources and being kind of regulated by the government to letting the mob run it, organized crime. And this is a real problem because organized crime starts to go up and up and up. Different gangs start to fight over territory where they can distribute it. The cops are going after the mobsters for alcohol, and it just creates a whole new thing they have to do. Now, on top of that, in the 30s, we go into the Great Depression, and the government says we could use a little bit more cash. Why don't we legalize alcohol again? Because the sale of it will bring in more tax dollars, more sales tax, and we can make more money. And so the 21st Amendment is going to repeal it. So this is easy. The 18th Amendment, like when you're 18, you can do a lot of stuff, but you can't drink, okay? When you're 21, you can legally drink. So 18 says you can't sell alcohol, the 18th Amendment, and the 21st Amendment says you can. Now, I'm actually going to stop right there. That's the end of the notes. If you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully this is helpful. Talk to you soon.